In this session we look at how to do an AML CFT audit using Audit Assistant. First, a bit of background. Money laundering is how criminals disguise the illegal origins of their money. Financiers of terrorism use similar techniques to money launderers to avoid detection by authorities and to protect the identity of those providing and receiving the funds. To maintain New Zealand's image as corruption-free in the global economy, the AML CFT Act 2009 was adopted to make the transfer of wealth from illegal activities into the economy or into terrorist activities more difficult, and to spot and track systems set up to facilitate those activities. The process of implementing and supervising this is shared in New Zealand between the Reserve Bank, the Financial Markets Authority (FMA), and Internal Affairs, as well as banks, casinos and financial service providers. Reporting entities also include lawyers, conveyancers, businesses providing trust and company services, accountants, real estate agents, high-value goods traders, and the New Zealand Racing Board. So an AML CFT program is based first of all on the client's risk assessment, so made by the compliance officer who's responsible for the program in terms of Section 58 of the Act. The risk assessment is specific to the type of industry firstly, then secondarily to the entity itself. So the risk assessment has to be thought through in terms of the specific requirements of the entity. And then the AML CFT program itself is based on the risks identified. It documents ways to manage and mitigate identified risks. It sets out internal policies, procedures and controls designed to detect and identify activities within the entity that may be attempts to carry out money laundering and/or financing of terrorism. Policies are expectations, standards and behaviours in the entity. Procedures are more detailed and set out the day-to-day operations to carry out the policies. And then controls are tools to ensure the business complies with policies and procedures. So all these form part of the AML CFT program. These policies, procedures and controls must be adequate to reasonably address the risks identified in the risk assessment. So who may carry out an AML engagement? Any appropriately qualified person may perform these audits in terms of the Act. So this is not restricted to chartered accountants. However, those already carrying out other types of assurance work are a natural choice. Chartered accountants are required to comply with SAE 3100 revised and ISAE NZ 3000 revised. Non-chartered accountant AML auditors work in accordance with the audit guidelines provided by the FMA, the Reserve Bank and Internal Affairs. So our audit templates are based on SAE 3100 and also based on ISAE NZ 3000 revised. For non-CA firms, we use the same template, but these are adapted somewhat, but the same workflow is followed. In terms of these standards, the subject matter of the audit is the AML CFT program established by the entity in terms of Section 56(1) of the Act. The purpose of the work is to provide assurance that the entity has complied with the requirements of the Act. The final conclusion is framed for limited assurance. That is, that nothing has come to our attention to indicate that the entity has not complied with the requirements of the Act. This limits the work required, but it still provides a comprehensive review that meets the requirements of the Act. Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand recommend the limited engagement as the best approach. These new versions that we've created in 2022 have been made in response to user feedback and are much more streamlined than our earlier versions. We've also updated to the revised assurance standards, and these are much clearer and provide better guidance. So what does the audit or the assurance work involve? There are normal acceptance, independence and engagement requirements as for any assurance work. We then gather the information from the client, we document and evaluate the risk assessment carried out by the client, and then document and evaluate the AML CFT program to make sure that the program is based on that risk assessment. We identify our own inherent and control risks and build a strategy around this. We test the controls to see if they extend across the period under review. and whether compliance has been maintained across the period. And then we have compliance checklists for all the requirements of the AML CFT Act. Finally, we obtain management representations. We create a management letter back to the client which contains suggestions for improvements. We summarise the engagement process and the results, identifying any areas of non-compliance. And finally, we complete our assurance report. So AML CFT engagements represent a significant opportunity for auditors to expand their assurance services. So please contact us to find out how we can help your practice thrive.